Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is from a very exciting author over on Reddit No Sleep by the name of Zacharius Frost. You may remember Zach's work from the story I covered about 2 months ago called There's a War Going On in Northern Canada, but it's not against humans. And I see you guys ate that one up, so I thought what better way than to bring back Zach for another story. Of course, as ever, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story. Entitled Confessions of a Mercenary Kazakhstan. Let's get straight into that. Kazakhstan is one of those countries that you almost never hear about. I honestly forgot it even existed until about a month ago. But now I fear it'll be lodged in the deepest recesses of my mind until the day I die. I still don't think I can even properly process what happened out there, but I'm going to try my best. You won't find this story from any journalist or any major news outlet. Do a quick Google search and you'll probably find a very few, if any, pertinent results. I suspect this is partially due to the endless deluge of trivial matters that consistently clutter the news cycle, but it's also because of another much more worrying fact. No one really even knows who or what we are fighting. Well, it started about a week ago, when our contract officers received an encoded distress signal from the Kazakhstani military outpost. It was from a place called Yalta, a small, isolated town with a population of about 300,000 in northern Kazakhstan. And normally, this would fall outside of our jurisdiction, but since Russia had sent the beacon to begin with, it became an exception. You know things are bad when the Russians actually ask someone else for help. I left the Marines almost 17 years ago now, and ever since I've been employed with a company by the name of Misnomer LLC. Officially, we are known as a private security agents and special investigation ops. Just a fancy way of saying mercenary, really. But with the rates they pay me, they can call me whatever they want. We specialize in surveillance, reconnaissance, and private security escorts, but are no strangers to insurgencies and the occasional small-time libertarian efforts. I've been on dozens of missions with them over the years, but nothing quite like this. As you may expect, this is commonly sensitive intel, and as such, the names in this document have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. Forgive me if they sound a bit ridiculous, but just be aware they are call signs and not actual surnames. From what the intel we managed to gather, we were told that a group of terrorists had been holed up just outside the town of Yalta. They didn't elaborate much on what said terrorists were up to, but my AO, assignment officer, mentioned that his contact had sounded incredibly urgent on the phone. While the Russians were offering a hefty sum for anyone who could clean up the situation and discreetly liberate the small town. No doubt they were worried about the international frenzy if word got out. But the contract was too good for us to ask those questions. We expected to find some ISIS or Al-Shabaab aligned sect that had burrowed into the hills. Well, needless to say, we had no idea what we were in for. 48 hours later, and I'm on a Boeing C-17 with 11 other members of my team and on a flight halfway around the world. The sunlight split in through the whole window, stirring me from my slumber as we neared our destination. I popped up the window shade and saw the destitute desert hills and valleys of northern Kazakhstan. We touched down a half hour later on the airstrip some 30 clicks from our target. And waiting for us there was the local military police, accompanied by multiple armored trucks and even a ZT Z99 tank. Their commander, a guy by the name of Yuri, introduced himself and his petty officers. And from there he led our team inside, fed us breakfast, and set up the room for briefing. The other guys dug into a feast of poached eggs, unleavened bread and goat sausage, but I didn't join. I never had much of an appetite before a mission. As the forks were cast onto plates and the small talk died down, Yuri approached the head of the table. He looked each of us up and down, and then his concrete mug opened to reveal yellow teeth in a crooked smile. Thank you, gentlemen, for agreeing to meet us here today. As you are probably aware, the situation has recently proven quite serious. Your expertise in this regard is most welcome, as in any input you may have. He eyed each of us as he spoke with narrowed, greyish-blue eyes. He then pulled a bottle of clear liquid and a stack of cups from underneath the table and smiled. Local tradition, he said, smiling. The men let out a couple of hoots and cheers, clearly enticed after the long flight. Yuri's men poured out the drinks and then the men accepted them graciously. They offered me one, but I stowed my hand. I wanted a clear mind, and frankly, the whole scenario seemed a little too cliché for my liking. My refusal didn't go unnoticed by Yuri. Not thirsty, Sergeant. I shook my head. I like to keep a clear mind. Yuri nodded and lifted his cup with the others. The group of them tapped their cups and downed their drinks one by one after the momentary salute. Yuri gasped as he gulped down the liquor and set his cup down, looking to me. After this, Sergeant, you're going to be wanting that drink. He wasn't kidding either, as the next 20 minutes were filled with one of the most head-scratching sit-reps I have ever heard. Yuri explained that a Russian philanthropist had purchased about 2,000 acres just outside the town of Yadya about a decade earlier. The said philanthropist had also recently been shot and killed just outside Moscow as he was getting into a taxi. Apparently, the man had acquired his fortune due to his work in bionic augmentation and advanced prosthetics. There was lots of rumours circulating his death, and with many believing it to be foul play on behalf of a rival business. A few days later, and the people of Yadya had sent a SOS to the Russian government, claiming that terrorists had invaded their land. Yuri and his team arrived a few days later, finding a small town in a state of chaos. 8 were dead, dozens were injured, and nearly 30 were missing after an explosion destroyed a gas station in town. Yuri and his men approached the city, but were fired upon by the occupying forces within. They didn't get a clear look at their would-be assailants, seeing only muzzle flashes and vague silhouettes in the homes around the town. They evacuated as many as they could, but they didn't manage to get everyone out. That was 2 weeks before we arrived, and it was the last of any movement seen in the town. Up until that point, the terrorists had made no demands or even attempted contact of any kind. No group had claimed responsibility for the attack, and they saw no flags or other identifiable symbols posted within the town. Yuri sent an ambassador and 2 guards to try and attempt communication, but the only response they received was a hail of gunfire, which nearly claimed the men's lives as well. It was clear the group was not interested in negotiation, and that we had our work cut out for us. The plan, as Yuri put it, was to enter the city and reach the church. He then told us something which I found really odd. Apparently, ever since the terrorists had taken over, they had been continuously broadcasting a radio signal from somewhere in town. Yuri's men had noticed it a few days later, but they couldn't make heads or tails of it. They said that 99% of the time, it just played old 1950s era music. He made no mention of what it played the other 1%, or if he even knew. It was kind of a weird detail to emphasize, but Yuri was insistent that priority number 1 was not the liberation of hostages, but rather finding the source of the transmission which they believed was in the church in the center of town. It's fairly standard for a client to have secrets they don't want to divulge, and I'm not in the business of asking too many questions, but a feeling in my gut told me that their secrets were more than the usual contractors. Our basic strategy involved my team taking an eastern road into the city under the cover of night. Meanwhile, Hydra and Barlow would enter the hills towards the west side and provide a clear vantage point and possible sniper cover from about half a click out. The Russian platoon, led by Yuri, would wait on standby, hidden just outside the town if things got too hairy. We waited for nightfall to commence on our approach. At about 2100 we set out in our convoy towards the city of Yalta with Yuri and his men. We halted our approach just outside the town, under the cover of the grove trees, and from there we continued on foot, while Gamma Team, consisting of Hydra and Barlow, split off to make their trek up to the foothills to the west of the city. Yuri and his men stayed behind waiting for our signal. After Gamma confirmed they were in position, we proceeded to move on the town. Around the premises were a series of crevices and ravines which we utilized to best hide our approach. Gamma kept a watch from the west while Command, aka Persimmon and Lima, circled above with small scouting drones that we call Hawks. We reached the outer limit of the town and, after both vantages confirmed no sign of enemy activity, we moved in. The town of Yalta is a poor, indigenous community of the Nome K people who have inhabited the lands for many generations. It's little more than a trailer park, with the only buildings of any significant size being the community centre and the town church. We moved on the house nearest to the main road, seeing no signs of any movement as we did. There was a large hole in the back of the house, looking as though something had broken out from inside, leaving debris scattered in the yard. Honestly, the damn town looked like the zombie apocalypse was well underway. Except for the distinct lack of zombies. I signaled the team to move in, using my night vision specs to keep a watchful eye on the vicinity. The house we entered was little more than a single-floor shack. Newspapers were scattered around the room from the wind leaking in a cracked window, and the place had a thick smell of dog odor and something else. Something metallic, but I was unable to identify it. "What the hell is this?" Diablo suddenly asked, prodding a rolled-up piece of newspaper at a puddle. The liquid was dark, but once stirred it revealed an odd shade of silver, like liquefied steel or mercury. "Motor oil?" Juniper asked, but Diablo shook his head. "Doesn't look like any motor oil I've ever seen." He tossed down the newspaper with a sickened look on his face. "Just leave it. We've got other things to worry about," I told him as I passed to look out the front window of the home. "Hey, Gamma, you got eyes on the church?" "Affirmative. Still no movement." They responded just as a cold wind blew through the town, scattering a pile of newspapers around the splintered home. I felt goosebumps rise on my arms as the breeze chilled me to the core. It was too quiet, and all of us knew it. We were about to move out when Mystic hollered from the other side of the house. "Hey, Sarge, hold up! Look at this!" I turned back to see him pointing at the wall. The wall looked like it had been blasted with buckshot, with little holes scattered all around and along with a few spackles of blood. I told Mystic as much, but he shook his head. "No, come here. Look closer." Reluctantly I did, and then I saw it. The holes weren't from shotgun pellets, but instead they were from little shrapnel pieces of tiny metal embedded into the wall, like shards from a pipe bomb or something. It was unusual, no doubt about it, but we didn't have time to sit there contemplating. I ordered the team out of the house and we moved to the other side of the street. The houses there seemed equally derelict as the one we had just entered. Rather than spend precious time scouring each home for evidence and survivors, we opted to continue onwards towards the church. We spent the next few minutes maneuvering our way through the neighborhood, our heads stuck on a constant swivel. The only things in sight were more homes and empty vehicles. At one point, we got spooked by the sounds of rustling from beyond the fence. Mandrake and Hammer moved in for a closer look, only for a gaggle of raccoons to come hissing out of their trash buffet. A mandrake jumped as one of them bolted towards him, only to scurry past and into the night. The rest of the team had a hushed chuckle at his expense, but I didn't share it. Their demeanors might have been growing more confident and ever jubilant, but mine was not. Every minute I spent there with no contact felt like we were just walking right into a trap. We moved another block closer to the church, seeing a few more abandoned vehicles and empty homes. One of the houses had a massive, gaping hole in the front portion of the house. It was instantly enticing. I ordered 2 of the men to check it out while the rest of us kept a watchful eye on the vicinity. The 2 men reached the house, and I watched as their rifles slumped in their hands. They looked to one another as if seeking reassurance or suddenly questioning what they had found. One of them then turned their back and motioned for us to join the team. Once we arrived at their side, I felt all of my preeminent assertions erode in my gut. In the ground of the home was a massive hole. It looked as though something had broken out of it from beneath, rather than it having been dug out by equipment. A vast tunnel stretched downwards, plunging so far down that I couldn't even see the bottom. A juniper sparked a flare and dropped it down the cavern. We watched as the pink glow plunged further and further down, bouncing off the wall multiple times. It finally came to a rest some 50 meters down, but its light illuminated a passage that clearly continued further into unseen crevices. Didn't know ISIS was in the mining business. Saffron joked, but no one laughed. I found myself at a loss for explanation as well. Truth is, it looked nothing like a mineshaft, and the fact that it was right in the middle of someone's home made it even more bizarre. It honestly looked like some massive worm creature had dug up from the bottom. But obviously, I didn't voice that opinion. And the mystery got even stranger when Diablo called out from the bedroom to the right of the hole. I shimmied my way around the hole until meeting him, and smelled what he had found before I saw it. There was a corpse in there, an older male by the looks of it. The body was in the early stages of decomposition, and with jaundiced cheeks and gangrene discoloration on the skin. Clearly, he had been dead for several days at least. But that was not nearly the strangest aspect. His upper body appeared to be relatively normal as far as any human corpses go, but its lower body was almost fully skeletonized. The bones were like nothing I'd ever seen though, appearing to be more metallic than biologic. I've seen many dead bodies in my time, but I've never seen anything quite like that. And the men continued to debate amongst themselves, but I paid it little mind. Whatever atrocities were going on in that godforsaken town were irrelevant to me, as the only thing I concerned myself with was reaching the church. I ordered the team onwards, and we exited the building en route to the church. A couple of minutes later, as we traversed another few streets, when the church first came into full view. Much like the rest of the town, the church was dark and appeared void of occupants. We regrouped just behind a house that stood adjacent to the church, and after confirming with Gamma and Command that they still had not seen no one, we decided to move on the church. I ordered the team to surround the premises, but remain close enough to be in visual sight of one another. The windows of the church were blacked out, covered from the inside by what looked like some kind of paint. Mystic and I moved on the front door, but before we could open it, the radio buzzed. "Alpha, you got movement down there." Mystic and I swiveled around to glance around the desolate streets. "Where?" I replied. "Northeast corner of town, next to the house with the green van." I looked down the road and saw the van he indicated. "How many?" Just one, I think. It moved so quick. Keep an eye out. I lost it behind that house down the block with the cracked garage door. No sign of it now." I looked down the road and saw the house, but no sign of anything else. The squad regrouped and I gave the signal to take defensive positions. We waited for a good minute or two, but saw no movement anywhere. kicked the door. I gave the command and Mandrake followed without hesitation. He tried prying against the door of the church, but it refused to budge. He then got to work setting a small demo charge, but the rest of us kept watch. "All set," Mandrake confirmed a moment later. I motioned for the team to take cover around the side of the church to avoid the concussion. "Light it." Mandrake hit the switch and the charge ignited in a muffled bang. The door erupted with shards of wood and metal and leaving smoke wafting into the area in its wake. Diablo and Saffron moved on the door and within moments passed inside. I followed soon after, but found they both had paused only a few feet inside. I was about to demand why they had frozen when I looked past them and got my answer. At the pew of the church was a vast array of wires, screens, and other mechanical devices. Thick bundles of cables wrapped with metallic coating sprawled the room, stretching upwards into the rafters and downward into holes and cracks that had split the floor of the church. And at the center was a large terminal that seemed to be at the crux of whatever the conduit was intended for. Once again, no trace of people. "Looks like ISIS have been upping their computer skills too." Saffron's joke was again met with silence, but the implications were vast. I knew then that this was more than a simple terrorist syndicate. Something very different had happened there. Sarge, we got contact." Suddenly Mystic shouted from behind. I turned and scrambled back to the front door, and two men stood outside, and beyond them, something was standing in the road. The person was covered by a large cloak which concealed most of their body, and stood motionless some 15 meters away from the church. I couldn't see much of them at first, but I could tell they were small, only about the size of a child, and they just stood there, motionless, as we trained our rifles on them. "Who are you?" I called out, but of course the person did not reply. Zero repeated the question in a local dialect, but got no response either, and I eyed the rest of the team and motioned for them to hold as I buzzed command. "Command, you read? We got contact." I awaited a response and still eyeing the motionless person standing in the road. "Say again, Alpha. We did not cut..." Before the broadcast could finish, an immense, whining screech reverberated through my earpiece. A lot of things happened simultaneously in that moment, but I'll try and relay them as they happened. Well, that screech was painful, and out of instinct I tore my earpiece out. At the same moment, I saw an immense flash emanate from behind me, coming from the church. Well, as soon as that happened, my night vision specs went dark. After briefly trying and failing to repair them, I tore them off as well. I then realized that the other members of the team were doing the same. "My goggle specs are out," somebody stated, but in the momentary confusion, I couldn't tell who it was. And the environment was suddenly near pitch dark. And had it not been for the luck of the full moon above, then we would have been near blind. Suddenly, gunshots broke out, but they weren't coming from us. They were far off and distant, coming from what I later learned must have been Hydra and Barlow on the hillside. They stopped after only a couple of seconds, and the unnerving silence returned. "Juniper, flare out," I called. A second later, and the vicinity was bathed in a reddish-pink light as the road flare sparked up. The light was momentarily blinding, but I managed to regain my bearings after a moment. "Where the hell did they go?" Juniper asked, sounding frantic. I then realized that the cloaked person was gone, and my adrenaline really went into overdrive. "Form up, watch the perimeter, do not engage." I shouted the command and began fidgeting with the radio once more. I tried raising command and gamma several times, but got no response. I cursed and checked my wristwatch, only to discover that it had lost power as well. What the hell is this place? And before any of us could do anything, the radio suddenly burst back to life with the sounds of music. Old-fashioned jazz, like from the 1950s or something. We just stood there stunned for a couple of moments, and I don't think anyone could even believe what we were hearing. It was incredibly eerie, given the circumstance, but it didn't last long. I held up an arm to hush the muddled conversations of the men. That's when I heard a voice coming through the radio. It was a female voice, or a text-to-speech function made to imitate one, and the way it spoke was almost robotic, with no vocal inflection on the words spoken. She spoke in Russian, though none of us understood what she was saying at the time. We learned from a later review that she was reciting a series of numbers. It went on for about 2 minutes before resuming the music once more. Then the music lasted a few more seconds before fading back into silence. A shadow then emerged in my peripheries further down the street. Before I could even turn, I heard someone fire their weapon. I looked just in time to see a cloaked figure fall to the ground a couple of meters away. I then turned back, finding Mandrake with a smoking barrel and a horrified look on his face. "Hold your fire," I commanded, but obviously the order came too late. I motioned for Diablo to accompany me to the fallen person as the others waited behind. My heart sunk as my worst fear was confirmed. It was a young girl, maybe 10 years old, the same person we'd seen earlier. Her breaths were shallow, and the bullet had found its mark in her chest. Despite the fatal wound, she showed no real sign of distress. No tears, no facial contortions, just a deadpan expression with vacant eyes. She wouldn't even look at us. Around her neck was what looked like some mechanical collar. I quickly realized that the device wasn't just some fashion accessory, but a piece of machinery that was melded directly into her neck. It expanded and contracted as she breathed in and out. Little pieces of it spun and clicked, and the apparatus appeared to extend further down her torso, but was hidden underneath her cloak. The bullet had struck her dead center in the chest, and there was nothing that we could do. In less than 10 seconds, she stopped breathing. Her head slumped back, and I watched the life fade from her eyes. So many questions and intrusive thoughts rushed through my mind. I couldn't help but step away. I didn't know. I didn't mean to. I watched tears roll down Mandrake's cheeks as he muttered the words over and over. I turned my attention back to Zero and Saffron, back at the entrance of the church. "You find anything?" Zero shook his head. "Just wires and screens. Could spend days tearing this place apart, but I don't even know where we'd begin, or what we're looking for." I nodded back to him and thought for a moment. The whole night had suddenly taken on a completely different and altogether terrible tone. But according to the details of our contract, we had fulfilled our end of the bargain and liberated the church. "Well, let's pack it in." I ordered the team to prepare to return from the way we had come. They all began to prepare, all but Mandrake, who stood there, silent. "Mandrake," I put a hand on his shoulder, causing him to jump, and we met eyes, and I could almost feel the unparalleled regret emanating from within his. "You couldn't have known." Mandrake just looked away. I felt for him, but that moment was not the time to feel sorry. We were prepared to move out when Hammer suddenly shouted, "Sarge, on your six!" I spun back and saw someone standing further down the road. There was a person garbed in a raggedy cloak shambling towards us. The person was clearly much taller and bulkier than a young girl, and was dragging something on the ground behind them. "Doctor!" I shouted the Kazakh word for stop at the person. They continued towards us, and I chambered a round in my rifle. "I said fucking stop!" And I stepped forward and the person broke into a dash. In seconds, they were charging towards us with reckless intent. I briefly saw the face of a man flash underneath the cloak before I fired. And I fired again and again, and the other team members joined in. The man must have been struck 24 times, but he barely seemed fazed. He lifted his arm, holding a long piece of metal, and prepared to strike. And that's when a bullet split his face right down the center, and he fell in a heap. The first thing I noticed was the metal accessories that were attached to various portions of his body. His entire left arm was missing, replaced by a bionic one. Before any sense of order could be re-established, another figure emerged further down the street. And seconds later, there was another to the right of the church, and then one on a nearby house, and then another that crawled out of the fissure in the road. In seconds, there were dozens of them, encroaching from all directions. Oh, there were too many of them, and I gave the only order I could: retreat. We began to run, knowing our weapons would not be nearly enough to hold off the approaching bionic horde. We hadn't gone more than 10 feet before one of them fell from the rooftops. He landed on Diablo and began tearing away at his flesh with metallic fingers. The man was elderly, and with his lower jaw being fully metal and devoid of flesh. A couple of shots to the head and chest, and he slumped away, allowing Diablo to escape. From there, all sense of order was lost entirely. It became essentially a free-for-all, with everyone running from the ever-increasing mob of bionic fiends. It kills me to admit it, but I ran like hell, and there was nothing we could do. If we hadn't ran, then it would have got all of us. I watched those people, those things, plunge their metallic hands into Saffron. I watched them tear handfuls of flesh and intestines out of him, all the while with those flat, emotionless looks on their face. It's like they weren't even human. At least, not anymore. Mystic finally put Saffron out of his misery with a shot from his pistol, before he too was seized. Saffron, Mystic, Hammer and Zero, but they never made it back. The mob consumed them after we had long since spent the last of our ammo. There had to be hundreds of those damn things there. Gamma Team, consisting of Hydra and Barlow, were also never found. 6 good men lost in that hellhole. We would have all been goners if it weren't for Yuri and his team waiting just outside the city. They managed to drive the denizens back as the remainder of the team scrambled away from the town. Before we got out, one of those things did something very strange. I saw a middle-aged woman approach us, her stomach split open into some cannon-like appendage, and seconds later launched a volley of metallic shards. I felt multiple of them strike me, and blood began to pool down my head, chest, and legs. I must have lost consciousness not long after. When I woke up, I found myself in a bed with bandages covering various portions of my body. Yuri was there waiting for me, and he stirred when he saw me awake. "Did you find the church?" I nodded weakly, erupting into a fit of coughs as I did. "And what did you see?" It took me a while between the coughing, but I basically told him we had found some kind of terminal, and with all the wires in a conduit. Yuri seemed interested by the answer, but clearly wanted more. Was it there? The way he emphasized the word made it seem strange. Was what there? Yuri just nodded and rose from my bed without another word. He put his coat on and was on the verge of leaving the room when I asked again. Was what there? What are you talking about? Yuri then paused and sauntered back over to my bedside. He then looked me dead in the eye. You wouldn't be asking that if you saw it, and if you did see it. He then uncurled his fist, revealing a small metal orb that looked somewhat like an eye. Then you wouldn't be able to ask. He left the room without another word, and I was left alone with the endless questions. Mandrake killed himself about a week after we got home. I know his mistake with the girl. I just aided him. But it doesn't make it any easier to accept. Last I heard, the Russians were planning to carpet bomb the entire town of Yatya. My commanding officer told me a few days later that things had exasperated well beyond their ability to contain it, and they were considering more drastic options. He then told me something which really made my hairs stand on end. You know that church you guys found? Persimmon asked, and I nodded. Well, apparently there was more to it than we thought. After we left, I was notified that the church was demolished, but not by the Russians. There was something underneath it. He didn't say what it was, but they sounded terrified. Last I heard, it burrowed back underground in the foothills. No telling where it is now. And there was only one question I could think to ask in response. What the hell is it? Persimmon paused for a long time, as if he knew the answer, or at least had a guess, but had no way to phrase it. In the end, he opted for a cop-out. Just something I was never meant to exist. I imagine that thing, whatever it was also what Yuri was referring to. I can't imagine what it even is, but I suspect it is the reason for the townsfolk macabre bionic transmutations. I never thought I'd see anything like we saw out there. I don't honestly expect anyone to believe this story. In hell, if I'd have heard it a week ago, I wouldn't either. God knows what really happened out there, or what will become of all of it. I'm not sure I even want to know anymore. That damn place took several good friends from me, and now I just want to forget it. The days of me risking my neck for a paycheck are over, and I am officially retired. I have a few other stories in my repertoire, and maybe one day I'll post them as well. But for now, all I can really do is hope the Russians figure out what that thing is and stop it before it emerges somewhere else. Wow. Certainly another one. Wow. Chest pounding, intriguing, and ultimately refreshing. Spec Ops story there from the incredible mind of Zacharius Frost over on Reddit No Sleep. Of course, big thank you, Zach, for allowing me to narrate this on the show. I'm sure the listeners enjoyed this just as much as I did, and we definitely look forward to more of your work in the future. Guys and girls, you know the drill. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. If you're an aspiring writer or would just like to have a crack at things like myself, then please do get in touch with me at the brand new contact email, which is contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope everybody's had a fantastic week at work or school. Perhaps you're a long-distance driver. Whatever it is that you do, I hope you're enjoying it and you're getting stuck in and taking a fight back to life. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.